At my brother's engagement, they sneered at my off-the-rack dress, whispering I was not worthy of their family. They had no idea the very ground they stood on was titled to me. Nor did they know I own the building where they clock in 5 days a week. I did not say a word that night. I just waited for the perfect moment to let the truth absolutely crush them. My name is Grace Johnson, at 29 years old. I had mastered the art of being invisible in a room full of people who demanded to be seen. I stood on the sidewalk outside the venue, checking the reflection in the darkened window of a parked sedan. My reflection showed a woman who looked entirely average. I wore a charcoal dress that I had bought off the rack 3 years ago, comfortable shoes that were designed for walking rather than posing, and no jewelry other than a simple silver watch. To the casual observer, I looked like an assistant, a librarian, or perhaps someone who had arrived to coordinate the catering. That was exactly how I liked it. It was a camouflage that had served me well for the better part of a decade. My family, however, viewed this simplicity as a personal failure. To my mother and father, my lack of flash was not a choice. It was a deficit. I grew up in a household that operated on a single, unwavering frequency, and that frequency was tuned entirely to my older brother, Logan Johnson. Logan was the sun, the moon, and the stars of the Johnson universe. He was 32 years old, with the kind of jawline that sold shaving cream and a handshake that felt like a contract being signed. He was the golden boy, the varsity quarterback turned corporate climber, the one who carried the family name like a banner. I was just the person who held the ladder while he climbed. Tonight was his night. It was always his night. But this evening was particularly significant. Logan was getting engaged, and he was not just marrying anyone, he was marrying Sloan Mercer. The Mercers were the kind of family that people in our city spoke about with a hushed reverence that I always found amusing. They were old money, or at least, they were old enough money that they had forgotten what it felt like to earn $1 with sweat. They valued lineage, connections, and the sort of influence that could make a traffic ticket disappear or get a table at a restaurant that had been booked for months. Sloan was the perfect embodiment of her clan. She was blonde, sharp-edged, and possessed a smile that never quite reached her eyes unless she was looking at a camera or a credit limit. I had been invited to the engagement party. Of course, it would have looked bad if the sister was not there, but the invitation had come with an unspoken set of instructions. I was to show up, smile, stay in the background, and not embarrass anyone with my mediocrity. I could almost hear my mother's voice in my head as I stared up at the building. Grace, just try to look presentable. You know how the Mercers are about appearances. Just tell people you are working in administration. Keep it vague. Administration. That was the box they had put me in their minds. I was the quiet sister with the safe, boring desk job. They assumed I processed invoices or answered phones for a mid-level manager. They never asked for details, and I never offered them. It was better that way. If they knew the truth, the dynamic would shift, and I was not ready for that shift, not yet. They did not know that administration was a word I used to cover the fact that I spent my days analyzing market trends, restructuring debt, and acquiring distressed commercial assets. They did not know that while Logan was leasing a luxury sedan to look the part of a success, I was buying the parking garages where he parked it. My phone buzzed in my clutch. I pulled it out, checking the screen. It was a number I recognized immediately. It was my lead attorney, David. I glanced around to make sure none of the Mercer clan was nearby before I slid my finger across the screen to answer. "Talk to me, David," I said, my voice dropping an octave, shifting instantly from the submissive sister to the woman who signed the checks. "We have the counter-offer on the distinctive warehouse project in the meatpacking district," David said, his voice crisp and professional. "They are pushing for $5.2 million. They want a closing date within 30 days. I did not hesitate. I had already run the numbers on that property 3 times. I knew the zoning laws were changing in that sector in 6 months. The value would double before the ink was dry on the deed if I played it right. 5.2 is acceptable, but I want the remediation clause removed. I told him, pacing slightly on the concrete. If I am taking the property as is, I am not paying for their environmental cleanup on top of the premium. Tell them we will close in 14 days. Cash. If they drop the clause, if they hesitate, pull the offer entirely. I have 3 other sites in pending status. Understood, David replied. And the acquisition of the retail strip on 4th Avenue? The paperwork is ready for your signature. Send it to my secure server. I will sign it before midnight, I said. I have to go. David, I have a role to play tonight. Good luck, Ms. Johnson, he said. Thanks, I will need it, I replied, and ended the call. I took a deep breath, holding the cool night air in my lungs for a moment before exhaling. I slipped the phone back into my bag. The transition was always jarring. One moment, I was negotiating a multi-million-dollar deal that would reshape a city block. The next, I was preparing to be treated like a poor relation who was lucky to be allowed indoors. I walked toward the entrance. The venue was a high-end event space, the kind with velvet ropes and security guards who judged your net worth by your shoes. It was located in one of the trendier districts, a place where rents had skyrocketed 300% in the last 5 years. As I approached the glass doors, I saw my reflection again. The shark was gone. The sister was back. I rolled my shoulders forward slightly, diminishing my posture just enough to look less confident. It was a physical habit I had developed over years of family dinners. If I looked small, they felt big. And when they felt big, they left me alone. The doorman glanced at me, his eyes flicking up and down with practiced indifference. He did not move to open the door immediately. Private event, he said, his tone flat. The Mercer Johnson engagement. I am Grace Johnson, I said quietly. The groom is my brother. He checked a list on a tablet, taking his time, as if he doubted that someone looking so plain could be related to the people upstairs. Finally, he found my name. Elevator to the left, penthouse level, he grunted, stepping aside. I walked into the lobby. It was sleek, modern, and smelled of lilies and money. I pressed the button for the top floor and watched the numbers climb. With every floor that passed, I could feel the armor tightening around me. I was entering a theater, and everyone upstairs was an actor in a play I had seen 1,000 times. When the elevator doors slid open, the noise hit me first. It was the specific roar of a cocktail party, the clinking of crystal, the murmur of 200 voices trying to sound important, and the low thump of jazz bass. The space was beautiful. I had to admit, floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the skyline. Waiters in white jackets moved like ghosts through the crowd, carrying trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. I stepped out, scanning the room. It did not take long to spot them. My parents were holding court near the center of the room, standing with Sloane's parents. My mother was wearing a navy gown that was tight enough to be uncomfortable but expensive enough to justify the pain. My father was laughing at something Mr. Mercer said, a laugh that was a little too loud, a little too eager. And there was Logan. He stood with his arm around Sloane, looking like the prince of the city. He wore a tuxedo that fit him perfectly. Sloane was in a shimmering silver dress that caught the light with every movement. They looked like a magazine cover. They looked like success. I took a step forward, and the air in the room seemed to shift. I felt the eyes of people I did not know sliding over me, assessing, categorizing, and dismissing. I was the anomaly in the room. I was the beige spot in a kaleidoscope of color. My mother spotted me first. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second, a micro-expression of disappointment, before she plastered it back on. It was the smile she reserved for neighbors she did not like and relatives who borrowed money. "Grace," she called out, waving me over. "You made it." I walked toward them, feeling the weight of the room pressing down on me. "Hello, Mother, Dad," I said, nodding to them. I turned to the Mercers. "Mr. and Mrs. Mercer, it is lovely to see you again. Mrs. Mercer." A woman whose face had been pulled tight by the best surgeons in the state looked at me with a vague confusion, as if she was trying to remember if I was the niece or the help. This is Logan's little sister, Grace, my father interjected quickly, putting a heavy hand on my shoulder. Grace is very steady. She works in an office downtown. Oh, how nice, Mrs. Mercer said, her voice dripping with polite disinterest. It is good to have a steady job in this economy. Just a simple 9 to 5, I assume? Something like that, I said, keeping my face blank. It pays the bills. Well, that is all anyone can ask for, isn't it? Mr. Mercer said with a chuckle that sounded more like a bark. Not everyone is cut out for the high-stakes world. Right, Robert? Exactly, my father agreed, squeezing my shoulder a little too hard. Grace likes the quiet life. She has always been content with less. The words hung in the air, a polite insult wrapped in a factual statement. Content with less. As if my ambition had capped out at paying rent and buying generic brand coffee. Where is the happy couple? I asked, needing to shift the focus away from my lackluster career. Oh, Logan is over there talking to the partners from the firm, my mother said, gesturing with her champagne flute. He is networking. You know how he is. Always working. Even when he is celebrating, he has such a drive. He certainly does, I said. You should go say hello, my father said, giving me a nudge. But try not to interrupt him if he is deep in conversation. These are important people. Grace, very influential. I will be careful, I promised. I stepped away from the parental cluster, grabbing a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray. I moved toward the edge of the room, near the windows. I needed a moment before I faced Logan and Sloane. From this vantage point, I could see the city spread out below us. It was a grid of lights and steel. I looked out at the skyline, tracing the shapes of the buildings against the dark sky. I knew the city in a way they did not. I knew which buildings were leveraged to the hilt. I knew which developers were one bad quarter away from bankruptcy. I knew the zoning maps better than I knew the lines on my own palm. I took a sip of water and watched the reflection of the party in the glass. They were all so loud, so sure of their place in the world. They thought power was about who you knew, about the loudness of your voice, about the brand of your watch. They had no idea. I looked down at the street level, watching the traffic crawl by. Then I looked back at the reflection of my brother, laughing with his head thrown back, Sloane clinging to his arm like a trophy. I thought about the phone call I had just finished. I thought about the $4.5 million I had moved just this morning to secure a plot of land 3 blocks west of here. I thought about the sheer, silent weight of the portfolio managed by Northbridge Holdings. I was not just Grace the sister. I was not just the girl in the charcoal dress. I was the person who could buy and sell half the people in this room before the appetizers were finished being served. But for tonight, I would play the part. I would let them make their jokes. I would let them look down on me. I would let them underestimate me. Because the only thing more dangerous than a predator is a predator that you mistake for prey. I turned away from the window and walked into the crowd, a small, secret smile playing on my lips. The party was just beginning, and I was the only one who knew how it was going to end. To understand why I stood in that penthouse with a glass of water and a silent smile, you have to go back 10 years. You have to go back to a rainy Tuesday morning when a lawyer handed me the keys to a duplex on the south side of the city that my great-aunt Clara had left me. My parents had been expecting money, or perhaps jewelry, something liquid, something easy. Instead, Clara had left Logan a collection of savings bonds worth $5,000, and she had left me a building that was technically condemned. My father had taken one look at the inspection report and laughed. He told me the property was a liability, a concrete noose around my neck. He advised me to sell it to a developer for pennies on the dollar just to avoid the property taxes. Logan had joked that I should burn it down for the insurance money, a comment that everyone at the dinner table found hilarious except for me. I drove out to the property the next day. It was an ugly, boxy thing with peeling yellow paint and a front porch that sagged like a tired jaw. It smelled of mildew and neglect. But when I walked through the empty, trash-strewn rooms, I did not see a burden. I saw walls that could be painted. I saw floors that could be sanded. For the first time in my life, I saw something that was mine, wholly and completely. It was a mess, but it was my mess. I did not sell it. Instead, I got a job waiting tables at a 24-hour diner to fund the renovations. For 2 years, my life was a blur of grease, coffee, and drywall dust. I learned very quickly that the world does not care if you are tired. The bank does not care if your back hurts. I spent my days fighting with contractors who tried to overcharge me because I was a 19-year-old girl, and my nights smiling at rude customers for $2 tips. I learned the business not in a classroom, but on the floor of that duplex. I learned how to install a toilet because I could not afford a plumber. I learned how to patch a roof because the estimate to replace it was more than I made in 6 months. I learned the hard, gritty texture of reality. While Logan was pledging a fraternity and buying rounds of drinks with father's credit card, I was arguing with the city code inspector about the variance on a stair rail. My family saw my exhaustion and called it a lack of direction. When I showed up to holiday dinners with paint under my fingernails and bags under my eyes, they would sigh and ask when I was going to get a real job. They did not understand that I was building an engine. The first time I rented out the upstairs unit, the check was for $850. Holding that piece of paper felt better than any grade I had ever received. It was proof of concept. I took that money and put every cent of it back into the building. I ate instant noodles. I shopped at thrift stores. I drove a car that rattled when it went over 40 miles per hour. I refinanced the duplex 18 months later based on the improved appraisal value. I pulled out $40,000 of equity. My father would have used that money to buy a boat or a new watch. I used it as a down payment on a 4-unit building 3 streets over that had been foreclosed on by the bank. That was the beginning of Northbridge Holdings. I chose the name because it sounded boring. It sounded like a company that made paper clips or managed actuary tables. I filed the incorporation papers myself, listing a registered agent so my name would not appear on public searches easily. I wanted to be invisible. I realized early on that anonymity was a superpower. If people do not know what you have, they cannot try to take it from you. They cannot ask for loans. They cannot jack up the price because they think you have deep pockets. The years blurred into a steady rhythm of acquisition and stabilization. I became obsessed with the mechanics of ownership. I read tax codes for fun. I understood depreciation schedules, capital gain strategies, and the intricate dance of leverage. I learned that debt, when used correctly, is not a chain, but a ladder. There were failures, of course. I bought a commercial space that sat empty for 9 months because I had misjudged the foot traffic. I lost $15,000 on a contractor who vanished with my deposit. I faced a lawsuit from a tenant who slipped on ice that I had already salted. I did not cry about these things. I categorized them as tuition. They were the cost of my education. As my portfolio grew, the gap between my reality and my family's perception of me widened. I would sit at Thanksgiving dinner, listening to my father brag about Logan's promotion to a junior executive role, a job that paid perhaps $80,000 a year. I would nod and smile, eating my turkey, knowing that Northbridge Holdings had netted 3 times that amount in the last quarter alone. They never asked. That was the thing that always amazed me. They never once asked how I could afford my apartment, even though it was modest. They never asked what I actually did during the day. They assumed I was a secretary or an administrative assistant because that was the only role that fit their narrative of me. If Grace was the failure, then Logan could shine even brighter. I was the shadow that gave his light definition. I remember one specific afternoon about 3 years ago. I had just closed on a mid-sized office park near the airport. It was my biggest deal yet, a transaction worth over $12 million. I had spent 6 months negotiating it, fighting tooth and nail with a private equity firm from Chicago. I was exhausted, exhilaratingly so. I went to my parents' house for dinner that night. I wanted, for just a fleeting second, to tell them. I wanted to put the deed on the table next to the pot roast and say, look at what I did. But the moment I walked in, my mother handed me a bag of old clothes. I was cleaning out the closet, she said. I thought you could use these for work. They are a little dated, but they are high quality, since you are on a budget. I looked at the clothes. They were worn, out of style, and smelled of her perfume. I looked at her face, filled with a pity that was bordering on contempt. I took the bag. "Thank you," I said. "This helps a lot." That was the moment I decided I would never tell them until I had to. Their pity was a disguise for my protection. As long as they thought I was poor Grace, struggling Grace, dull Grace, they would never look closely at the LLCs purchasing the buildings where they shopped and worked. I realized then that true power is not about having your name on a building in gold letters. It is about holding the deed in a fireproof safe while everyone else walks past it, oblivious. It is about the quiet confidence of knowing that you can walk into a room and buy everyone's silence, but choosing not to because it is more amusing to watch them talk. So, I continued to play the part. I wore the scuffed shoes. I drove the sedan with the dent in the bumper. I listened to Logan brag about his bonus checks, which were enough to buy a nice watch, but not enough to buy freedom. I built Northbridge Holdings brick by brick, deal by deal, entirely in the dark. And tonight, as I stood in the corner of this engagement party, watching the waiters pour champagne that I knew cost $80 a bottle, I felt the weight of that history in my pocket. My family saw a sister who had barely scraped by. I saw a CEO who had built an empire from a rotting duplex. They were celebrating a marriage, a union of social status. I was celebrating the fact that I owned the roof over their heads. And for the first time in my life, the silence felt less like hiding and more like a weapon being slowly drawn from its sheath. The champagne glasses clinked together with a sharp, expensive sound that cut through the low hum of jazz. I stood near a potted palm, nursing my sparkling water, watching my brother command the room. Logan had a way of standing that suggested he was about to sell you something you did not need but would thank him for later. He raised his hand, signaling for silence, and the crowd obeyed instantly. "Everyone, if I could have a moment," Logan announced, his voice projecting easily to the back of the room. He flashed that signature grin, the one that had charmed teachers, coaches, and apparently, the entire Mercer clan. "Tonight is obviously about Sloan and me, and we are so incredibly grateful for all of you being here, but I have a little bit of extra news to share. Consider it the cherry on top." He paused for effect. I watched Sloan beam up at him, her hand resting possessively on his chest. "As of Monday morning," Logan continued, puffing out his chest slightly, "I will be officially joining the team at Meridian Fleet Group as their new Senior Director of Logistics." A ripple of applause broke out, enthusiastic and loud. I saw my mother clap her hands together as if she were praying, her face flushed with pride. My father slapped Mr. Mercer on the back. "Welcome to the fold, son," Mr. Mercer shouted over the applause. "It is about time we got some fresh blood on the executive floor. We are going to do great things." I froze. The glass in my hand stopped halfway to my mouth. Meridian Fleet Group. The name bounced around inside my skull like a pinball. I knew that name. I knew it very well. I did not know it because they were a famous logistics company, or because they were particularly innovative. I knew it because I had seen that name on a rent roll spreadsheet 3 days ago. I blinked, looking around the rooftop terrace with new eyes. I had been so focused on keeping my head down and surviving the social awkwardness that I had not paid close enough attention to the venue itself. We were on the roof of the Hawthorne building. My heart gave a strange, singular thump. I had purchased the Hawthorne building 11 months ago. It was a distressed commercial asset that had been bleeding money due to poor management and a high vacancy rate. I had acquired it through Northbridge Holdings, stripped the management team, and implemented a rigorous renovation schedule. I looked down at the floor beneath my feet. It was a composite decking material that I had personally approved because it was durable and eco-friendly. I looked at the glass railings. I remembered arguing with the contractor about the height specifications to ensure they met the updated safety codes. I looked back at Logan and the Mercers. They were cheering for a job at a company that leased 3 floors in a building that belonged to me. They were standing on my roof, drinking champagne, celebrating their own importance, completely oblivious to the fact that the woman in the cheap charcoal dress was their landlord. The irony was so thick I could almost taste it. It tasted like iron and victory. Logan stepped down from the makeshift stage, shaking hands and accepting congratulations. He made his way through the crowd, eventually spotting me in the corner. He excused himself from a group of admirers and walked over. His smile dimmed just a fraction when he reached me, shifting from triumphant executive to older brother dealing with a nuisance. "Grace," he said, smoothing his lapel, "you have been quiet. Enjoying yourself?" "It is a lovely view." "Logan," I said, my voice steady. "Congratulations on the new job. Meridian, that sounds impressive." "It is huge," he said, leaning in closer, his voice dropping. "6 figures, stock options, the works. The Mercers really looked out for me. Sloane's dad pulled some strings, but obviously, my resume did the talking. The whole family is in the company. It is a dynasty, Grace, and now I am part of it." "A dynasty," I repeated. "That must feel secure." "It does," he said. He glanced around to make sure no one was listening, then cleared his throat. "Look, Grace, since we are talking, I need to ask you something. A little favor." I knew this tone. It was the same tone he used when he needed me to cover for him in high school, or when he needed gas money in college. "What is it, Logan?" "This party," he said, gesturing vaguely at the opulent spread. It ended up being a little more over budget than we planned. Sloane wanted the premium seafood tower, and the open bar tab is running high. Mom and Dad have already chipped in a ton, and I do not want to ask the Mercers for another dime right now. I want to look like I have things under control." He paused, waiting for me to fill the silence. I did not. "So," he continued, a hint of irritation creeping into his voice, "Mom mentioned you have been saving up, since you live so frugally and all. I was hoping you could cover the venue deposit. It is just $2,500. I will pay you back once my signing bonus clears in a few months." $2,500. He was asking me to pay for the rental of a venue that I owned. Technically, he was asking me to reimburse myself for a contract that my own management company had issued. I looked at him. I looked at the entitlement etched into his handsome features. He truly believed he was doing me a favor by letting me contribute. He thought my money was just sitting there, stagnant and useless, waiting to serve his greater purpose. $2,500, I said slowly. "Come on, Grace, do not be stingy. It is for family. You are always hoarding your money anyway. What are you saving for? A cat?" He laughed, a short, dismissive sound. "You can transfer it to my account tonight, right?" I could have said no. I could have told him to ask his rich future father-in-law. I could have laughed in his face. But then I thought about the bigger picture. I thought about the lease agreement for Meridian Fleet Group that was coming up for renewal in 8 months. I thought about the power of knowing exactly where they stood financially while they knew nothing about me. If I paid this, I wasn't losing money. I was buying a front row seat to the show. I was buying the moral high ground. And more importantly, I was keeping the camouflage intact. If I argued over $2,000, I was just the poor, stingy sister. If I paid it, I was the supportive, invisible bank. "Okay, Logan," I said. "I will transfer it tonight." He slapped my shoulder, relieved, but not grateful. "Thanks, Gracie. You are a lifesaver. Seriously. Though, try to mingle a bit. You look like you are at a funeral." He turned and walked back toward Sloane, who was laughing loudly near the bar. I watched him go. Then, I pulled my phone from my clutch. I did not open my banking app. Instead, I opened my encrypted messaging app and found the thread with my legal team. I typed a message to David. "I need the full lease agreement for Meridian Fleet Group sent to my secure drive immediately. Also, pull the event contract for the rooftop rental at the Hawthorne tonight. I want to see the liability clauses and the payment schedule. Cross-reference the signers." I hit send. A moment later, a reply came through. "On it, is there a problem with the tenant?" I typed back, "Not yet, just doing due diligence. I want to know exactly who is operating in my building." I slipped the phone back into my bag. I walked toward the edge of the roof again. The wind whipped my hair across my face. I placed my hand on the railing. I could feel the vibrations of the building beneath me. It was a living thing, a massive structure of steel and concrete that responded to my command. Logan thought he had just climbed the ladder. He thought he had reached the summit by marrying into the Mercer family and landing a job at their company. He had no idea that the ladder he was climbing was leaning against a wall that I had built. I stepped away from the railing and walked toward the elevator bank. I needed to use the restroom, and I wanted a moment of quiet. As I pressed the call button, I looked at the small brass plaque next to the elevator doors. It listed the building management company, managed by NH Services, N8, Northbridge Holdings. It was right there in front of their faces. It was on the directory in the lobby. It was on the invoices that Mr. Mercer's finance department paid every month. It was on the contract Logan had just asked me to pay for. The elevator doors slid open. I stepped inside, the mirrored walls reflecting a woman who looked nothing like a powerhouse. But as the doors closed, shutting out the noise of the party, a small, cold smile touched my lips. I was not just a guest at this party. I was the host. I was the landlord. I was the bank. And they were all just living in my world, paying rent for the privilege of looking down on me. "Going down," I whispered to the empty car. But I knew, in reality, I was the only one going up. The Mercers and my brother were standing on a trapdoor, and I was the one with my hand on the lever. I just had to decide when to pull it. The $2,500 was a small price to pay for the satisfaction of knowing that when they finally fell, they would fall on my terms. The transition from the cool air of the terrace back to the assigned seating arrangement was a masterclass in social engineering. I navigated through the maze of round tables draped in heavy white linens, looking for my name card. I passed table 1, where Logan and Sloane sat like royalty, flanked by the Mercer parents and my own beaming mother and father. I passed table 2, occupied by Meridian executives who were already loosening their ties. I kept walking. I finally found my place at table 9. It was the table furthest from the view, positioned directly next to the swinging metal doors of the service kitchen. Every time a waiter burst through with a tray of filet mignon, a gust of stale air and the clatter of dishwashing hit the back of my neck. I looked at the other guests at my table. There was a distant cousin of the Mercers who had arrived late, a photographer's assistant who was eating quickly before getting back to work, and an elderly neighbor who kept asking where the bathroom was. It was a deliberate choice. Sloane had arranged the seating chart. Placing the groom's sister next to the kitchen was not an oversight. It was a statement. It said, quite clearly, that I was staff adjacent. I was part of the machinery that made the party work, not a guest to be honored. I sat down, smoothing the napkin over my lap. The waiter bumped my chair as he rushed past, muttering a quick apology without looking down. I shifted my chair inch by inch, trying to minimize the impact, but there was nowhere to go. "Great spot, isn't it?" a voice boomed from the table next to us. I turned to see Uncle Rick, Sloane's uncle, leaning back in his chair, a glass of scotch balancing precariously in his hand. He was a large man who wore his wealth like a suit of armor, loud and heavy. "It is certainly active," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "You know, I had to pull some serious strings to get us this venue," Rick announced to the group at large, though his eyes lingered on me with a strange mix of pity and arrogance. "The management here? They are notoriously difficult, exclusive, but I made a call to the leasing director, told him who we were, told him the Mercers were coming to town. He opened the calendar right up." I took a sip of water to hide the twitch at the corner of my mouth. I knew for a fact that the leasing director, a young man named Kevin who worked for my management firm, had simply processed the online inquiry and charged them the standard premium rate plus a rush fee of 15%. There were no strings. There were no favors. There was just an algorithm and a credit card authorization form. "We are very grateful." "Rick," my father chimed in from the head table, raising his glass. "It is a stunning location, only the best for Logan and Sloane." "Well, you know what they say," Rick continued, winking at me. "You get what you pay for. Although, looking at you back there in the cheap seats, Grace, maybe you are saving up for your own big day? Or is there even a lucky guy on the horizon?" The table laughed. It was a low, polite ripple of amusement, but it stung. I am focusing on my career right now, I said. Right, right. The office job. Rick nodded, feigning interest. Data entry, was it? Or filing? Administrative support, my mother interjected quickly, her voice shrill. She looked at me with pleading eyes, begging me not to embarrass them. Grace prefers a low-stress environment. She is not like Logan. She does not have that hunger. She is very happy with her simple life. She has a lovely little apartment, very cozy. Cozy usually means you can touch the stove from the bed. Sloane's brother, a junior associate at a law firm, joked. It serves my needs, I said. And that is important, Mrs. Mercer said, her tone dripping with condescension. She looked at me like I was a stray cat that they had graciously allowed to sleep on the porch. Not everyone can be a high achiever. Grace, the world needs people to do the smaller tasks. It is honest work. Exactly, my father agreed. Grace knows her limits. We are proud of her for maintaining her independence. They were dissecting me. They were stripping away my dignity layer by layer, wrapping their insults in the guise of praise. My father was practically apologizing for my existence. He was assuring the Mercers that my mediocrity was contained, that it was not genetic, that it would not taint the glorious union of Logan and Sloane. I cut into my chicken. It was dry. Mass catering usually was, even at $200 a plate. I ate mechanically, letting their words wash over me. I thought about the bank balance of Northbridge Holdings. I thought about the fact that I could buy the firm where Sloane's brother worked and turn it into a parking lot if I felt like it. The knowledge was a warm coal in my chest, burning hot and secret. Sloane floated over to our table during the lull between the main course and dessert. She placed a hand on my shoulder, her diamond ring flashing under the recessed lighting. Grace, sweetie, she cooed. Are you doing okay back here? I felt so terrible putting you at table 9, but the head table was just so crowded with the executives and the partners. I knew you would understand. You are so easygoing about these things. It is fine. Sloane, I said. The view of the kitchen is educational. She laughed, a tinkling sound that lacked all warmth. You are so funny. Oh, by the way, make sure you don't wander into the VIP lounge area on the south deck. Security is checking wristbands, and I didn't think to get you one since, well, it is mostly for business talk. I didn't want you to be bored. Considerate of you, I said. I try, she beamed. Oh, and Logan said you helped with the deposit. That was sweet. Every little bit helps, right? She patted my shoulder again, 2 sharp taps, and drifted away before I could respond. She had just dismissed my contribution as sweet, like a child offering a handful of pennies, while simultaneously ensuring I knew I was excluded from the real party in the VIP lounge. Logan was nowhere to be seen. He was likely in that VIP lounge, smoking a cigar and pretending to understand the intricacies of fleet management. He was so drunk on validation that he didn't notice his sister was being treated like a piece of furniture that didn't match the decor. The air in the room was stifling. It was thick with perfume and ego. I needed a moment. I stood up, grabbing my clutch. Excuse me, I murmured to the table. I walked away from the noise, heading not toward the restrooms, but toward a small maintenance alcove near the emergency exit on the north side. I knew the layout of this building perfectly because I had approved the architectural blueprints during the renovation. I knew there was a quiet corridor there that led to the service elevators. As I turned the corner, I heard voices. They were low, urgent, and coming from the semi-darkness of the corridor, I stopped. The acoustics in this hallway were excellent. The hard concrete bounced sound effectively. I recognized the voices immediately. One was Rick, the loud uncle who had mocked my career. The other was a man I didn't know by name, but I recognized him as one of the supply chain partners Meridian worked with. I had seen his face on the vendor list during my due diligence. I pressed myself against the wall, shielded by a large potted ficus. The margins are too tight on the official bid. Rick, the partner was saying, his voice hissing with frustration, if we run the new fleet maintenance through the subsidiary in Jersey, we can hide the markup, but I need you to sign off on the intake forms. I told you. I can handle the paperwork, Rick replied, the ice in his glass clinking. Logan is coming in as director of logistics. He is green. He is eager. I will dump the intake review on his desk. He will sign whatever I put in front of him because he wants to impress me. He won't check the vendor codes. My breath hitched. You are sure? The partner asked. If compliance catches this, it is fraud, Rick. It is grand larceny. Compliance is looking at the big numbers, Rick scoffed. They aren't looking at the maintenance subcontracts. We skim 8% off the top of the tire and oil contracts. That is $40,000 a month. Split 2 ways. Logan takes the fall if it goes south. We claim he authorized the vendors. He is the new guy. It is perfect. Poor kid, the partner chuckled. Marrying into the family and getting set up as the fall guy in week 1. He gets a fancy title and a trophy wife, Rick said dismissively. He pays his dues. Just get the paperwork ready for Monday. I will make sure he signs it before he even gets his login credentials. They moved away, walking back toward the party, their laughter fading into the music. I stood there in the shadows, my heart hammering against my ribs, not from fear, but from a cold, sharp rage. They weren't just mocking me. They weren't just using my building. They were actively planning to frame my brother for corporate fraud. They were going to use Logan's ambition as the weapon to destroy him, all while smiling in his face and drinking his champagne. I pulled my phone out. I had not recorded the audio. It was too risky, but I opened my notes app. My fingers flew across the screen. Date, October 14. Time, 8:45 p.m. Location, North Corridor. Hawthorne Building. Subject, Rick Mercer and vendor partner. Details, discussion of skimming scheme via Jersey subsidiary. Maintenance subcontracts. 8% markup. Plan to use Logan Johnson as signatory to evade compliance. I saved the note to my secure cloud. Then I backed it up to a secondary server. I took a deep breath, smoothing the fabric of my dress. The anger I felt was different now. Before, it was the dull ache of exclusion. Now, it was the sharp, precise focus of a hunter who has just spotted the prey's limp. I walked back into the party. The jazz band was playing a cover of a Sinatra song. My parents were clapping. Logan was back at the head table, kissing Sloane's cheek. Rick was slapping Logan on the back, pouring him another glass of wine, acting the part of the benevolent uncle. I returned to my seat by the kitchen doors. The waiter dropped a tray of silverware, the crash echoing through the room. I didn't flinch. I picked up my fork and took a bite of the dry cake that had been placed in front of me. Let them laugh. Let them joke about my poverty. Let them think they were the masters of the universe. They had just handed me the keys to their destruction, and they didn't even know I was holding the lock. The party was fake. The smiles were fake. The love was fake. But the eviction notice I was mentally drafting, that was going to be very, very real. The photographer was a man with a ponytail and an aggressive energy, barking orders at the gathered crowd as if he were directing a military operation rather than a family photo. He was waving his hands, gesturing for the Mercer clan and the Johnson family to squeeze tighter together against the backdrop of the city skyline. Okay, let us get the parents in the middle. Bride and groom front and center. Siblings on the wings, he shouted, snapping his fingers. I stood up from my exile at table 9. This was the obligatory part of the evening, the part where we pretended to be one big, cohesive unit. I smoothed the front of my dress, took a breath to steel myself, and walked toward the group. I intended to stand on the far left, next to my father, where I could be easily cropped out later if they desired, but present enough to satisfy the etiquette of the moment. I was 3 steps away from the group when Sloane intercepted me. She moved with a fluid, predatory grace, stepping away from Logan's side to meet me before I could reach the formation. She kept her back to the photographer and the rest of the family, creating a small, private wall of white silk and expensive perfume between me and the celebration. She smiled, but her eyes were scanning me up and down with a clinical detachment. "Grace," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that was barely audible over the wind and the chatter. "Hold on a second. I am just getting in for the photo," I said. pointing toward my father. The photographer called for siblings. Sloane reached out and adjusted the strap of my dress. It was a gesture that looked affectionate from a distance, like a sister-in-law fixing a stray thread. Up close, her touch was cold and firm. "Listen," she said, her tone light and breezy, as if she were commenting on the weather. "We are going for a very specific look for the press release and the social media blast. The palette is silvers, navies, and crisp blacks, very sharp, very high society." She paused, letting her eyes linger on my charcoal dress. It was a perfectly fine dress. It was clean, tailored, and appropriate. But it was not designer. It did not shimmer. It was, in her eyes, dull. "You know I love you, Grace," she continued, the lie sliding off her tongue like oil. "But honestly, you do not really fit the image we are trying to project right now. You look a little tired, a little drab. It disrupts the visual cohesion." I stared at her. I felt the words hit me. Not like a slap, but like a slow-acting poison. It wasn't just that she thought I was ugly or poor. It was that she viewed me as a stain on her perfect picture. I was a smudge on the lens. "You want me to sit out the family photo?" I asked, my voice flat. "At my brother's engagement?" "Just the main press shots," she said, patting my arm. "We can take some candids later with your phone or something, but for the official Meridian announcement, we need power players. We need sparkle. You understand, don't you? You have always been so good at staying in the background." She didn't wait for an answer. She turned around, flipping her hair, and glided back to Logan. She looped her arm through his and whispered something in his ear that made him laugh. I looked at Logan. I looked at the brother I had tutored in math so he could pass high school. The brother I had just given $2,500 to so he wouldn't lose face. He was looking right at me, or rather, through me. He didn't wave me over. He didn't ask where I was. He was too busy beaming at the camera, too busy playing the role of the successful executive to notice that his sister had just been cut out of the frame like a cancer. For years, I had told myself that Logan was just oblivious. I had told myself that he was a good guy who just happened to be self-absorbed. But as I stood there, watching the flashbulbs pop, illuminating their perfect smiles, I realized the truth. He wasn't just oblivious. He was complicit. He allowed this. He allowed them to treat me like dirt because it was easier than defending me. The anger that rose in my throat was so thick I could barely swallow. But I did not scream. I did not storm the stage. I did not throw my drink. That is what a powerless person would do. That is what a woman who has no other options would do. I had options. I had nuclear options. I turned on my heel and walked away. I walked past the bar, past the waiters, and out into the main hallway. I needed silence. I pushed open the door to the ladies' restroom. It was empty. Thankfully, it was a space I knew well. I had personally selected the Italian marble for the countertops and the gold leaf fixtures during the renovation. I walked over to the sink and gripped the cold edge of the stone. I looked at myself in the mirror. The woman staring back didn't look tired. She didn't look drab. She looked lethal. Sloane was right about one thing. I didn't fit their image. I was not a decoration to be placed or removed at her whim. I was the architect of the entire stage they were dancing on. "Image," I whispered to the reflection. "You are worried about the image." I thought about the conversation I had overheard in the hallway. I thought about the fraud. I thought about Logan signing his life away to a criminal scheme because he was too arrogant to read the fine print. If I stopped this now, if I ran out there and shouted the truth, I would save Logan. Yes, but I would be the hysterical sister ruining the party. They would deny it. They would gaslight me. Logan would hate me for embarrassing him. No, saving him now would only teach him that I was his safety net. It was time for the net to be removed. It was time for the floor to drop out. I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. My hands were perfectly steady. The trembling I had felt earlier was gone, replaced by a crystalline clarity. I unlocked the screen and dialed David. It was 9:15 at night. He would answer. He always answered. "Grace?" David's voice was groggy. likely answering from his couch. Is everything okay? It is late. I am activating the compliance clause, I said. My voice was low, devoid of any emotion. It was the voice I used when I fired a contractor for stealing copper wire. I am sorry? David sounded confused. For which property? For this one, I said. The Hawthorne Building, and specifically, for the commercial lease held by Meridian Fleet Group on floors 4 through 6. There was a pause on the line. I could hear the rustle of him sitting up, shifting into work mode. Grace, that is a major tenant, David warned. If we trigger a full compliance audit, we are talking about a forensic review of their operations within the building, vendor access logs, security footage reviews, subleasing verification. It is aggressive. It signals that we suspect breach of contract. I do not suspect it, David. I know it, I said. I want you to draft the notice tonight. I want it served to their legal department at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Cite Section 14, Paragraph B of their lease agreement regarding prohibition of illicit commercial activities on premises. Tell them we have received credible reports of irregularities involving unauthorized vendor access and potential financial misconduct occurring within our property. You want to go to war with Meridian? David asked. No, I said, looking at my reflection again. I want to evict the rot. And David, I want the liability shield for the building management locked down tight. If they are doing something illegal, I want it clear that Northbridge Holdings has zero tolerance. Burn the bridge. David, burn it all the way down to the water. Understood, David said. I will get the team on it. Expect the draft in your inbox within 2 hours. Thank you. I hung up. I stood there for another moment, listening to the silence. I washed my hands, the warm water running over my skin. I dried them on a linen towel. I reapplied a layer of clear lip balm. The decision was made. The gears were turning. By tomorrow morning, the comfortable, corrupt world of the Mercer family would begin to fracture. By next week, it would shatter. And Logan would have to learn the hard way that the view from the top is only great until the building collapses. I opened the bathroom door and walked back out into the party. The photography session was over. The music had picked up tempo. Sloane was on the dance floor, her arms thrown up in the air, laughing as she spun in circles. Logan was watching her, a drink in his hand, looking like he had won the lottery. I walked back to my table near the kitchen. I sat down. I picked up my fork. Sloane happened to glance over in my direction. She caught my eye and gave me a little wave, a smug, satisfied gesture that said, "See? You are back in your corner where you belong." I lifted my glass of water in a silent toast. I smiled at her. It was a genuine smile. It was the smile of a person who has already seen the end of the movie and knows that the villain does not make it to the credits. "Enjoy the party," I whispered. "It is the last one you are going to enjoy for a very long time." I did not scream. I did not confront them at the buffet. I did not throw my drink. Revenge is a dish best served not with heat, but with paperwork. The next morning, I was not Grace the sister. I was the unseen hand of Northbridge Holdings. I sat in my home office, a space my family assumed was a crafting corner, but was actually a command center with 3 monitors and a direct line to a forensic accounting firm. The party had ended at 1 in the morning. By 8 o'clock, I had already reviewed the preliminary lease audit David had sent over. The lease agreement for Meridian Fleet Group was standard on the surface, but the devil is always in the addendums. Clause 14B was my weapon of choice. It gave the landlord, me, the right to audit any tenant activity that posed a reputational or financial risk to the property. Rick Mercer's little scheme to skim from maintenance contracts using a Jersey subsidiary wasn't just theft. It was a breach of the building's vendor code of conduct. I didn't need to prove he was stealing to hurt him. I just needed to prove he was non-compliant. Trigger the audit. I typed into the secure chat with David. Issue a formal request for all vendor access logs for the past 6 months. Cross-reference them with approved service providers. If a truck entered the loading dock without a manifested work order from a bonded company, I want to know about it. I watched the digital clock on my screen tick forward. At 9:15, the email went out. It was not from me, Grace Johnson. It was from Legal Department, NH Services. It was sterile, professional, and terrifyingly vague. It simply stated that a routine compliance review had flagged irregularities in the loading dock usage and that a full audit of supply chain vendors operating on the premises was now mandatory. At 10:30, I received a notification that the email had been opened by Meridian's general counsel. At 11 o'clock, my phone rang. It was my mother. "Grace?" She sounded breathless. "Have you heard from Logan?" "No," I said, taking a sip of coffee. "Why? Is he hungover?" "He is confused," she said. "He went into the office this morning to sign his final onboarding papers, to get his badge and his laptop, but HR told him there is a hold on his hiring." "A hold?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly level. "That is strange. Did they say why?" "They said it is an administrative freeze pending an internal review," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Logan is frantic. He thinks it is just a glitch, but he said the atmosphere in the office is weird. People are running around with files. The legal team is in a closed-door meeting." "I am sure it is just corporate bureaucracy," I soothed. "These big companies always have red tape." "I hope so," she sighed. "He was so excited. He quit his other job already. Grace, he has payments to make on the new car. He needs this." "He will be fine, Mom. Logan always lands on his feet," I said. I hung up and turned back to my screens. The administrative freeze was standard procedure when a landlord flagged a potential criminal activity on the premises. Meridian's own compliance officers were now scrambling. They couldn't onboard a new director of logistics, Logan, when the entire logistics department was under investigation for vendor fraud. By Tuesday, the cracks were starting to show. I had instructed my building security team to enforce strict access control. Every vendor, every delivery driver, every maintenance worker had to present valid ID and a work order that matched the approved vendor list. Rick Mercer's Jersey subsidiary didn't have valid work orders. They had handshake deals. I watched the security feed from the loading dock on my second monitor. I saw a van marked Mercer Logistics Solutions, the shell company, pull up to the gate. The driver leaned out, joking with the guard. Expecting to be waved through as usual, the guard, a new hire I had personally approved, shook his head. He pointed to the clipboard. The driver argued. The guard picked up his radio. The van turned around and left. That was the first domino. The supplies didn't get delivered. The maintenance didn't get done. The skim stopped flowing. Wednesday brought the panic. I was at my actual office, a sleek, minimalist space in a building across town that my family didn't know existed, when I received an alert. Meridian's legal team had responded to the audit request. They were pushing back, claiming proprietary business confidentiality. I called David. "They are stonewalling," David said. "They say the vendor list is trade secret." "It is a building safety issue," I countered. "Tell them if they do not provide the vendor credentials within 24 hours, we will suspend their access to the freight elevators for safety inspections. Let us see how they run a logistics company without a freight elevator." "That is ruthless," David chuckled. "That is business," I said. "Send the letter." Thursday evening, I went to my parents' house for the weekly family dinner. The atmosphere was funereal. Logan was sitting at the kitchen table, his head in his hands. Sloane was pacing the living room, talking on her phone in a hushed, angry whisper. "I do not know. Daddy?" she hissed into the phone. "They are saying it is the building management. They are saying some auditor is flagging everything. Well, fix it. You know people." She hung up and threw the phone onto the sofa. She looked at me, her eyes narrowing. "You are late," she snapped. "Traffic," I said, setting down a salad I had brought. "Is everything okay?" "No, everything is not okay," Logan groaned. "The job is stalled. They still haven't cleared me to start. And now there is some rumor about an investigation. Rick is freaking out. He says someone is targeting the family." Targeting the family? I asked, feigning innocence. Who would do that? I don't know. Logan slammed his hand on the table. But it is messing up everything. We have deposits to pay for the wedding. We have the honeymoon to book. I can't be unemployed right now. Grace? Maybe you should ask Sloane's father for an advance, I suggested helpfully. I can't ask him, Sloane shrieked. My dad is dealing with his own mess. The building management is threatening to lock down the elevators. They are demanding paperwork that doesn't exist. She stopped, realizing she had said too much. What do you mean, doesn't exist? I asked. Nothing, she snapped. Just corporate nonsense. You wouldn't understand. It is complicated, high-level stuff. Right, I said. Too complicated for me. I sat down and served myself some salad. I watched them spiral. They were so busy blaming invisible enemies that they couldn't see the simple logic closing in on them. They had built their house on sand, and I had just turned on the hose. Friday was the day the paperwork finally spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. My team received the vendor logs. They were a mess. Duplicate invoices, shell companies, and inflated hours. But the smoking gun was a series of emails my forensic team recovered from the server logs. Meridian used a shared server that backed up to the building's main data line for redundancy, a clause they had agreed to for cheaper rent. One email, dated 2 weeks prior, was from Rick Mercer to Logan Johnson. Subject: New role setup. Body: Logan. Once you are on board, I need you to sign off on the attached vendor renewal for Prime Maintain. Don't worry about reading the details. It is just standard renewal stuff we do every year. Easy win for your first week. Prime Maintain was the shell company. I forwarded the findings to the Meridian Board of Directors. I didn't send it as Grace. I sent it as the Office of the Property Owner, attached to a formal notice of default. The notice stated that the tenant was in violation of the anti-corruption clause of their lease, and that unless an internal investigation was launched immediately, the lease would be terminated in 30 days. I essentially held a gun to the head of the entire company. If they didn't clean house, they would lose their headquarters. The board reacted instantly. By Friday afternoon, the news broke internally at Meridian. An external audit firm was brought in. 3 executives were placed on administrative leave. One of them was Rick Mercer. And Logan? I received a text from him at 4 p.m. They rescinded the offer. They said my name was associated with a flagged transaction in the pre-employment screening. I am out, Grace. I am completely out. I stared at the text. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel sadness. I felt the cold, hard satisfaction of a ledger balancing out. I typed back, I am so sorry. Logan, that sounds unfair. He replied, It is Sloane, her family. I think they tried to use me. The HR rep asked me if I knew anything about a Jersey subsidiary. I didn't know what they were talking about, but Rick did. He was starting to see. The blindfold was slipping. I closed my laptop. The first phase was complete. The foundation of their arrogance had been cracked. Now, it was time to let the whole structure come down. I had the documents. I had the proof. And on Monday, I would have the pleasure of walking into that building not as a visitor, but as the owner who had come to collect the rent. The weekend that followed the rescinding of Logan's job offer was a masterclass in denial. My parents' house, usually a shrine to their middle-class aspirations, had transformed into a bunker of despair. I sat on the beige sofa, watching my mother pace back and forth across the Persian rug she was still paying off in installments. Logan was slumped in the armchair, staring at the floor, looking less like a corporate executive and more like a teenager who had crashed the family car. Sloane was there, of course. She was sitting on the armrest of Logan's chair, her hand resting on his neck, but her eyes were darting around the room, manic and terrified. She was not comforting him. She was guarding him. She was making sure he did not stray from the narrative her family had constructed. We just have to be patient, Sloane said for the 10th time that hour. Daddy said it is just a mix-up. The compliance team is just being overzealous because of the merger rumors. Once Rick clears it up, everything will be back on track. They rescinded the offer. Sloane, Logan said, his voice hollow. They didn't pause it. They killed it. They said I was a security risk. Do not use that word, my mother snapped. She turned to me, her eyes red from crying. Grace, get your brother some water. Stop just sitting there. I stood up slowly. I am just trying to understand, I said, keeping my voice soft. If it is just a mistake, why did they flag Logan specifically? Usually, security risks are tied to financial irregularities or background checks. Did you sign anything? Logan? Anything that might have triggered an alarm? The room went deadly silent. Sloane's head snapped up. Her eyes narrowed into slits. What are you implying, Grace? I am not implying anything, I said. I work in administration, remember? I see this happen with vendors sometimes. If a contract isn't clean, the signatory gets flagged. I am just asking if Logan signed any vendor contracts before he was officially hired. You do not know what you are talking about, Sloane spat. This is high-level corporate governance, not some invoice dispute at your little office. You are trying to make this his fault. I am trying to help him figure out why his career is imploding, I countered calmly. You are not helping, my father shouted from the kitchen doorway. He walked in, holding a glass of scotch. You are making it worse. Grace, you always do this. You sit there with that blank look on your face, asking these literal questions, picking things apart. Can't you see your brother is hurting? Can't you just offer some emotional support instead of acting like an auditor? She is jealous, Sloane said, her voice trembling with a mix of rage and fear. She has been jealous since the engagement party. I saw the way you looked at us. Grace, you hate that Logan is successful. You hate that he is marrying into my family. You are probably happy this is happening. That is ridiculous, I said. Is it? Sloane stood up, walking toward me. You were the one asking about the venue costs. You were the one lurking in the hallways. Maybe you said something to someone. Maybe you gossiped to one of the waiters. And it got back to the management. You have always been bitter. It was an absurd accusation. A desperate flailing of a drowning woman trying to climb on top of anyone to stay afloat. But my parents latched onto it. It was easier to blame the jealous, unsuccessful sister than to accept that the wealthy, powerful Mercer family was corrupt. Grace, if you said anything to anyone, my mother warned, her voice low. I didn't speak to a soul, I said. But blaming me won't fix the fact that Meridian thinks Logan is a liability. Just be quiet, my father yelled. If you cannot say anything positive, just shut your mouth. We need to present a united front. The Mercers are going to fix this. Rick promised. I sat back down. I crossed my legs. I folded my hands in my lap. Okay, I said. I will be quiet. And I sat there in silence for the next 2 hours, watching the tragedy unfold. I watched Mr. Mercer call Logan and put him on speakerphone. I listened to the patriarch of the Mercer clan bully my brother. Logan, listen to me. Mr. Mercer's voice boomed from the phone. Do not talk to any lawyers. Do not contact HR. If you make a scene, you will look guilty. We are handling this internally. Just sit tight. If you start asking questions, you are going to embarrass Sloane and me. Do you understand? I understand, sir, Logan said, his voice weak. But my reputation. Your reputation is what I say it is, Mercer barked. Just trust the family. We protect our own. The call ended. Logan looked sick. He looked like a man who had just been told to stand still while a train bore down on him. I saw the doubt flickering in his eyes. He looked at Sloane. Why would asking questions make me look guilty? Sloane, if I didn't do anything? Because, Sloane shrieked. Because corporations are sensitive. Just stop overthinking it. Logan, you are stressing me out. God, I need a drink. She marched to the kitchen to pour herself wine. The room remained tense. I checked my watch. It was 4 o'clock on a Monday afternoon. My internal timing was impeccable. Sloane's phone chimed. It wasn't a text. It was an email notification. She glanced at it, and the color drained from her face so fast, I thought she was going to faint. She dropped the wine glass. It shattered on the tile floor. red wine splashing across the cabinets like blood. "Sloan?" Logan asked, jumping up. "What is it?" She scrambled to pick up the phone, her fingers shaking so hard she could barely unlock the screen. It is nothing. Just work." "You dropped a glass," I observed. "That is not nothing." "Shut up, Grace!" she screamed. She stared at the screen. I knew exactly what she was reading. I had CC'd myself on the blind copy of the summons that my compliance team, acting on behalf of the building owner, had sent to Meridian's HR, who had then forwarded it to Sloan. It was a notice to appear. The building management had provided digital evidence linking her employee access card to the unauthorized entry of the shell company's delivery vans. Meridian's HR was demanding an immediate interview. "I have to go," Sloan stammered. "I have to go to the office." "Now?" my mother asked. "But you are so upset." "They need me to sign some affidavits regarding Logan's case." Sloan lied. "To clear him. Yes, that is it. I am going to save you. Logan." She grabbed her purse and ran out of the house. She didn't kiss Logan goodbye. She didn't look back. She fled. The front door slammed shut. The silence that followed was heavy. "See," my mother said, wiping her eyes. "She is fighting for you. Logan, she is a good woman. You are lucky to have her." Logan didn't answer. He was staring at the puddle of wine on the floor. He looked up, and his eyes met mine. For the first time in years, he didn't look at me like I was his inferior. He looked at me like I was the only other person in the room who was actually awake. "Grace," he said quietly, "you asked if I signed anything." "I did." I nodded. "Why did you ask that?" "Because fraud usually requires a signature. Logan, and the person who plans the fraud rarely signs it themselves." "Don't listen to her," my father growled. But Logan stood up. He walked over to his laptop bag, which was sitting by the door. He pulled out his computer. "What are you doing?" my mother asked. "I am checking my archives," Logan said, "before they cut off my remote access." He sat down at the dining table. He opened his laptop. His fingers flew across the keyboard. He wasn't looking for job offers anymore. He was looking for the truth. I watched him. I knew what he would find. I knew that Rick Mercer was lazy. I knew he had sent the contracts via email because he didn't want to drive to Logan's apartment. I knew that the digital trail was permanent. "God," Logan whispered. "What?" my father asked. "What is it?" "The email from Rick," Logan said, his voice shaking. "From 2 weeks ago. The subject line is vendor setup. I didn't even read the attachment. I just DocuSigned it because he told me it was urgent." He clicked open the attachment. He scrolled down. "It is a service agreement," Logan said, reading aloud, "between Meridian Fleet Group and Prime Maintain LLC, authorizing a monthly retainer of $42,000 for unscheduled maintenance consultation." "So?" my mother asked. "That sounds standard." "Mom," Logan looked up, tears standing in his eyes. "Prime Maintain LLC lists its registered address as a P.O. box in Trenton, and the contact person is listed as S. Mercer. S. Mercer. Sloan Mercer." "No," my mother whispered. "That cannot be right." "She is the beneficiary," Logan said. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He slumped back in his chair. "She is taking the money, her and her uncle, and they made me sign the contract that authorizes the payments. They set me up. Before I even started the job, they made me the bagman." "There must be a mistake," my father insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. "Sloan loves you. The Mercers they are good people. They have money. Why would they steal?" "Because they do not have money, Dad," I said. The three of them looked at me. "What did you say?" Logan asked. "Rich people do not steal $40,000 from their own company unless they are desperate," I said calmly. "If they were truly wealthy, they wouldn't risk prison for such a small amount. They are cash poor. Logan, they are leveraging their status to float their lifestyle, and they needed a scapegoat to sign off on the new income stream because the old director of logistics probably refused to do it. Logan stared at me. The pieces were clicking into place. The rushed engagement, the pressure to join the company, the way Sloan handled the finances, the refusal to pay for the party deposit. "You knew," Logan said. It wasn't a question. "I suspected," I corrected. "I recognized the pattern." "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Would you have believed me?" I asked. "If I had told you last week that your fiancé was using you to embezzle money, would you have believed me? Or would you have called me jealous and bitter, just like you did 10 minutes ago?" He opened his mouth to argue, but then he closed it. He looked down at the laptop screen, at the signature that was going to ruin his career before it even started. "They threw me to the wolves," he whispered. "Sloan just ran out of here not to save me, but to save herself." "Yes," I said. "What do I do?" He looked at me, panic rising in his chest. "Grace, what do I do? If I go to the police, I admit I signed it. If I stay quiet, I am an accomplice." "You need a lawyer," I said. "Not the family lawyer. A real one. Someone who specializes in white-collar crime and whistleblower protection." "I can't afford that," he said. "I spent my savings on the ring. I am broke, Grace." I looked at my brother. He was broken. The golden boy was tarnished, stripped of his arrogance, left with nothing but the terrifying reality of his own foolishness. "I know a lawyer," I said. "He is expensive, but he is good. He owes me a favor." "You?" my father scoffed, even now, amidst the wreckage. "You know a high-powered lawyer? From where? Your data entry job?" I stood up. I picked up my purse. I walked over to Logan and placed a business card on the table next to his laptop. It was David's card, but not the one he gave to the public. It was the one he gave to high-net-worth clients. "Call him," I said. "Tell him Grace Johnson sent you. Tell him you want to trigger the whistleblower clause." "Grace," Logan said, reaching out to grab my wrist. His grip was desperate. "How do you know all this? Who are you really?" I looked down at him. I pulled my wrist free gently. "I am just your sister," I said. "The one who is content with less, remember?" I turned and walked to the door. Behind me, the house was silent, save for the hum of the refrigerator and the sound of a family's delusions shattering on the floor. "Where are you going?" my mother called out, her voice frightened. "I have work to do," I said. I walked out into the cool evening air. I got into my car. I checked my phone. I had a message from David. "Sloan Mercer just arrived at the Meridian HR office. She is crying. She is trying to cut a deal. She is offering to testify that Rick forced her to do it. The sharks are eating each other." I started the engine. I didn't smile. This wasn't funny anymore. It was a demolition, and I was the one operating the wrecking ball. The meeting took place at 10 o'clock on Tuesday morning in the main conference room of the Meridian Fleet Group. It was a glass-walled aquarium of a room on the 12th floor, offering a commanding view of the city skyline. The table was mahogany, long enough to seat 20 people, and polished to a shine that reflected the fluorescent lights overhead. On one side sat the Mercer clan, Mr. Mercer, looking red-faced and combative, Mrs. Mercer, who was aggressively checking her phone, and Sloan, who was wearing a pale pink cardigan and no makeup, a calculated costume designed to elicit sympathy. On the other side sat my family. My father was hunched over, wringing his hands. My mother looked like she was attending a funeral. Logan sat in the middle, staring at a blank notepad, his face pale and drawn. I sat at the far end of the table, slightly detached from the main group. I had placed my phone face down on the table. I had no notepad. I had no water. I was simply observing. "Let us make this quick," Mr. Mercer started, his voice booming in the acoustic space. He didn't look at me. He looked strictly at Logan. "This entire situation is a misunderstanding that has gotten out of hand because people panicked. We need to contain the damage before the board takes drastic action." He slid a single sheet of paper across the table toward Logan. "What is this?" Logan asked, his voice raspy. "It is a statement of clarification," Mr. Mercer said, waving his hand dismissively. It just states that there was a clerical error in the vendor onboarding process, that you authorized the Prime Maintain contract without full vetting due to inexperience, and that you accept a probationary period. In exchange, the company agrees not to pursue legal action, and we handle the reimbursement internally. I will write a personal check to cover the discrepancy. We wash our hands of it. Logan looked at the paper. I could see the desperation in his eyes. He wanted it to be over. He wanted to believe that signing a piece of paper would make the nightmare go away. "You want me to say it was my error?" Logan asked. "It is a formality, son," Mr. Mercer said, his tone softening into a manipulative purr. "Look, Rick messed up. We know that. But Rick has been with the company for 20 years. If he goes down, the stock takes a hit. If you take a little slap on the wrist for clerical error, nobody cares. You are the new guy. Rookie mistake. We saved the family reputation, and you still get to marry my daughter." Sloane sniffled loudly. She reached out and touched Logan's hand. "Please, Logan, Daddy is trying to help us. I cannot deal with this stress anymore. I haven't slept in 2 days. Just sign it so we can go back to planning the wedding." My parents looked at Logan with hopeful, pathetic eyes. "Maybe it is for the best." "Logan," my father whispered, "Mr. Mercer is being very generous to offer to pay the money back." Logan picked up the pen. His hand was shaking. "If you sign that," I said, my voice cutting through the room like a scalpel, "you are admitting to gross negligence and potentially facilitating wire fraud. You will never work in a bonded industry again." "Mr. Mercer's head snapped toward me. His face turned a shade of purple that looked dangerous. "Excuse me?" he barked. "This is a family matter. I thought you were just here for moral support. Since when does the secretary give legal advice?" "Grace, please," my mother hissed. "Do not ruin this." I ignored them. I looked directly at Logan. "Read the second paragraph, Logan," I said calmly. "The clause about accepting full liability for vendor verification. If you sign that, and if the IRS or an external auditor looks at that shell company later, Meridian can use this document to sue you for the entire amount plus damages. Mr. Mercer isn't saving you. He is building a firewall to protect Rick, and you are the brick he is using to seal it." "She is talking nonsense," Sloane cried, tears streaming down her face. "Why do you hate us, Grace? I just want this to be over. I didn't know anything about the money. Rick told me to set up the LLC for tax reasons. I didn't know he was billing the company." "You didn't know?" I asked. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't sound angry. I sounded curious. "Sloane, to open an LLC in New Jersey, you have to provide a notarized copy of your driver's license and a wet signature. You also have to open a business bank account. Are you telling me you walked into a bank, sat down with a relationship manager, provided your social security number, and signed a signature card for Prime Maintain LLC without knowing what it was for?" Sloane froze. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. "That is enough." Mr. Mercer slammed his hand on the table. "You are out of line. Who the hell do you think you are interrogating my daughter?" "I am someone who understands how compliance works," I said. "And I know that Meridian's building management has already flagged the vendor logs. The paper trail is already external. Mr. Mercer, you cannot fix this with an internal memo. The landlord has the data." My father looked at me. For the first time in my life, I saw something other than disappointment in his eyes. He looked confused, bordering on frightened. He had never heard me speak like this. He had never heard me use words like compliance, external auditor, or liability. He was looking at a stranger wearing his daughter's face. "What do you know about the building management?" Mr. Mercer narrowed his eyes. "I know that they operate on a zero-tolerance policy for vendor fraud because it voids their insurance premiums," I said. "And I know that yesterday, a subpoena was issued for the bank records of Prime Maintain LLC." "How do you know that?" Sloane whispered. The color had drained from her face completely. The victim act was dropping, replaced by the raw terror of a culprit caught in the headlights. "Because it is standard procedure," I lied smoothly. "When a tenant is flagged for suspicious activity, The property owner protects the asset. It is not personal. Sloan, it is just business. You are lying, Sloan said, her voice rising to a shriek. You are just trying to scare Logan. Daddy, make her stop. Grace, my mother said, her voice trembling. How do you know all these things? You work in a cubicle. I said simply. Before anyone could respond, there was a sharp knock on the glass door. We all turned. Standing there were 3 people, 2 men in dark suits and a woman holding a tablet. I recognized the woman immediately. It was Sarah, the head of the audit team I had hired through Northbridge Holdings. She didn't know I was Grace Johnson, the sister. She only knew me as the anonymous owner she reported to via encrypted email, but she was here because I had instructed her to be here at exactly 10:15. Mr. Mercer stood up. We are in a private meeting. The lead man stepped forward. He flashed a badge. It wasn't a police badge. It was a corporate security credential, but it carried the weight of authority. Mr. Mercer, Ms. Mercer, the man said, I am James Miller from Meridian's Internal Compliance Division. This is Ms. Davis from the external audit firm retained by the property ownership. Mr. Mercer sank back into his chair. Compliance? I didn't authorize a compliance review. No, James said. The board of directors did, following a formal notice of default received from the building owner regarding illicit activities on the premises. James walked over to the table. He didn't look at Logan. He looked directly at Sloan. Ms. Mercer, James said, we have obtained access logs that show you authorized the entry of a vehicle registered to a Mr. Rick Mercer on 4 separate occasions when no work orders were present. We also have a copy of the incorporation papers for Prime Maintain LLC, listing you as the sole proprietor. Sloan started to shake. I was just following instructions. That is a matter for the investigation, James said. Effective immediately. Your access to the building is suspended. We need to escort you to your desk to collect your personal effects, and then you will be escorted from the premises. Escorted? Mrs. Mercer gasped. Like a criminal? She is a Mercer. She is an employee under investigation for embezzlement, James said flatly. And Mr. Mercer? The board has requested your presence in the executive suite immediately. They have some questions about your countersignature on the vendor approval forms. The room was silent. The air pressure seemed to drop. Logan looked at the paper in front of him, the confession he had almost signed. He picked it up. He looked at Mr. Mercer, who was now staring at the table, defeated. He looked at Sloan, who was weeping into her hands, not for him, but for herself. Then, Logan looked at me. He saw me sitting there, calm, collected, hands folded. He saw the way the compliance officers had entered exactly when I said they would. He saw the way I had anticipated every move the Mercers made. Grace, Logan whispered. I didn't answer him. I just nodded at the compliance officer. Ms. Davis, I said, addressing the external auditor. Does this conclude the immediate risk to the property? Ms. Davis looked at me, surprised that a random family member was addressing her with such specific terminology. The investigation is ongoing, ma'am, she said politely. But yes, the immediate breach has been contained. Good, I said. Who are you? Mr. Mercer whispered, staring at me across the table. You are not just a secretary. No secretary talks like that. No secretary knows the audit schedule. I am Logan's sister, I said, standing up, and I think we are done here. Wait, Sloan screamed, standing up and knocking her chair over. You did this. You reported us. You are the rat. I am not a rat. Sloan, I said, picking up my purse. A rat hides in the walls. I am the one who called the exterminator. You bitch! She lunged forward, but her father grabbed her arm. Sit down. Sloan? Mr. Mercer yelled. He looked at me with a mixture of hatred and fear. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that he had miscalculated everything. He had looked at my cheap dress and my quiet demeanor and assumed I was nothing. He hadn't realized that the quietest person in the room is often the one listening the hardest. "Come on, Logan," I said. "You do not work here. You have no reason to stay." Logan stood up. He left the unsigned confession on the table. He didn't look at Sloane. He walked around the table and stood next to me. My parents remained seated, paralyzed by the sudden shift in power dynamics. They looked from the weeping Sloane to the defeated Mr. Mercer, and then to me, the daughter they had ignored for 20 years, who had just dismantled a dynasty in 10 minutes without raising her voice. "Mom, Dad," I said, "are you coming? Or do you want to stay and watch them get escorted out by security?" My father stood up slowly. He looked at Mr. Mercer. "Bob, is it true? Did you really try to pin this on my son?" Mr. Mercer didn't answer. He just covered his face with his hands. My father turned away. He walked toward the door. My mother followed, looking back at Sloane one last time with a look of pure confusion. We walked out of the conference room. As the heavy glass door clicked shut behind us, I heard Sloane start to scream at the compliance officers. It was a shrill, ugly sound. We walked down the hallway toward the elevators. The office was buzzing with whispers. People were staring, but they weren't staring at Logan with pity anymore. They were staring at the group of us who had just walked out of the lion's den alive. We reached the elevator bank. I pressed the button. "Grace," my father said, his voice quiet. How did you handle that?" "I told you, Dad," I said, watching the numbers count down. "I learned a few things over the years." The elevator arrived. We stepped inside. As the doors closed, sealing us in the steel box, I knew the hardest part was over, but the final reveal, the one that would truly shatter their world, was waiting for us in the lobby. Because I wasn't just taking them out of the building, I was taking them to the truth. The elevator ride down to the lobby was silent, a heavy, suffocating silence that felt thicker than the steel doors enclosing us. My father was staring at his shoes. My mother was gripping her purse like a lifeline, and Logan was looking at me with a mixture of awe and terror. He had just watched his little sister, the one he thought was a receptionist, dismantle a corporate executive and a compliance team in under 15 minutes. When the doors slid open, the lobby of the Hawthorne building was bustling with the mid-morning rush. Couriers were running packages, executives were shouting into phones, and the security team was managing the flow of visitors. It was a symphony of commerce, and usually, I loved the sound of it. Today, however, it sounded like the drum roll for an execution. We stepped out onto the polished granite floor. I intended to walk straight to the revolving doors and leave, but the sound of heavy footsteps behind us stopped me. "You wait just a minute." It was Mr. Mercer. He had taken the next elevator down, leaving Sloane and his wife upstairs to deal with the immediate fallout. He came storming across the lobby, his face a map of broken veins and fury. He blocked our path to the exit, ignoring the curious glances from the reception staff. "You think you can just walk in there, throw around some legal jargon, and leave?" Mr. Mercer hissed, stepping close to me. "I do not know who you are sleeping with to get that inside information, Grace, but you have made a very powerful enemy today." "Bob, please." My father stepped forward, his voice shaking. "Let us just go. The engagement is off. It is over." "It is not over until I say it is," Mr. Mercer spat. "I am going to sue you. I am going to sue your son for breach of contract. And I am going to sue you, young lady, for corporate espionage. You accessed private vendor logs. That is a felony. I will have you in handcuffs by tonight." "You want to sue me for accessing the vendor logs?" I asked, my voice calm enough to freeze water. "You are damn right I do," he growled. "You are a nobody, a secretary. You think because you read a few files you are untouchable? I know the ownership group of this building. I play golf with the management board. One call from me, and they will ban you from ever stepping foot in a Class A office building again." I looked at him. I looked at the arrogance that refused to die. Even when it was cornered, he truly believed that power was a club he belonged to. And I was just the help looking through the window. "You play golf with the management board?" I repeated. That is right, he sneered. NH Services. I know the directors. Name one, I said. He faltered. That is none of your business. The point is, I have influence. You have nothing. I sighed. It was a genuine sigh of boredom. I was tired of the charade. I was tired of the mask. I turned my head slightly toward the main security desk, where the head of building security, a former Marine named Marcus, was watching the altercation with a tense readiness. Marcus knew me. He knew me very well, but he also knew the protocol. Never acknowledge the owner unless she initiates contact. I nodded at him, just once. Marcus moved instantly. He signaled to the building manager, Kevin, who was standing near the concierge desk. Kevin straightened his tie and walked over to us with a brisk, professional stride. Is there a problem here, Ms. Johnson? Kevin asked, ignoring Mr. Mercer entirely and addressing me with the deference one shows to a head of state. Mr. Mercer looked at Kevin, confused. Excuse me? I am speaking to this woman. Who are you? I am the building manager, Mr. Mercer, Kevin said, his tone icy. And you are shouting at the owner of this property. The silence that fell over our small group was absolute. It was as if the air had been sucked out of the lobby. What? Mr. Mercer laughed, a sharp, incredulous bark. The owner? Her? She is a receptionist. She can barely afford rent. Ms. Johnson is the sole proprietor of Northbridge Holdings, Kevin stated, reciting the fact as if it were the weather report, which owns the Hawthorne Building, the adjacent parking structure, and the retail complex on the South Block. She is also the one who authorized the compliance audit on your firm this morning. Mr. Mercer looked at Kevin, then he looked at me. His brain was trying to process the information, but the cognitive dissonance was too strong. He looked at my off-the-rack dress. He looked at my sensible shoes. He looked at the daughter he had spent months mocking. That is impossible, he whispered. Northbridge Holdings is an investment firm. It is faceless. I am the face, I said. I reached into my tote bag. I didn't pull out a compact or a phone. I pulled out a tablet. I unlocked it and brought up the corporate structure document that I kept for moments exactly like this. I turned the screen toward him. Northbridge Holdings, LLC, I read aloud, pointing to the top of the chart. 100% equity held by Grace E. Johnson. I swiped the screen. Hawthorne Building Deed, I continued. Purchased 18 months ago for $142 million. Signed by Grace E. Johnson. I swiped again. Meridian Fleet Group Lease Agreement, I said. Landlord's signature, Grace E. Johnson. Mr. Mercer stared at the screen. His eyes were wide, unblinking. He read the names. He read the numbers. He read the dates. My parents were leaning in, looking at the tablet over his shoulder. Grace? My mother whispered, her voice sounding like it was coming from underwater. 142 million? That was the purchase price. Mom, I said, not looking at her. The current valuation is closer to 180 million after the renovations. Renovations? My father choked out. You fixed the roof? I fixed everything. Dad, I said. I own the roof. I own the walls. I own the elevators Logan rode up in. I own the conference room where you just sat. I own the ground you are standing on right now. Logan was staring at me. He looked like he had been hit by a truck. He was replaying every conversation we had ever had. Every time he offered to pay for my dinner. Every time he asked if I needed gas money. Every time he bragged about his salary, which I now realized was less than what I paid in property taxes for a single month. The party, Logan murmured. The engagement party. You paid the deposit to yourself. I moved money from my personal account to my business account, I clarified. It was simpler than explaining why I was waiving the fee. Mr. Mercer stepped back. He looked physically ill. The power dynamic hadn't just shifted. It had inverted. He wasn't threatened by a secretary anymore. He was threatening a real estate mogul who could bankrupt him with legal fees before breakfast. You set us up, he stammered. You knew we were skimming, and you let us walk into a trap." "I didn't set you up, Bob," I said. "You set yourself up. I just turned on the lights." Just then, the elevator doors opened again. Sloane came running out. She was holding a box of personal items, tears streaming down her face, her mascara running in black streaks. She saw us and ran over, ignoring the scene she was causing. "Daddy," she wailed. "They took my badge. They escorted me out like a thief." She stopped when she saw her father's face. She saw the tablet in my hand. She saw the way the building manager was standing next to me, like a Praetorian guard. "What is going on?" she asked, her voice trembling. "She owns it," Mr. Mercer whispered. The fight had gone out of him. He looked old. "She owns the building. Sloane, she owns all of it." Sloane looked at me. She blinked, her mind racing. I could see the gears turning. I could see the exact moment she decided to pivot. She dropped the box. It hit the floor with a crash. She stepped over it and reached for my hands. "Grace," she sobbed, her voice taking on a frantic, pleading tone. "Oh my God. Grace, I had no idea. Why didn't you tell us? We are family. We could have been partners." It was disgusting. It was visceral. Minutes ago, she had called me a bitch. Now, seeing the zeros in my bank account, she was trying to reestablish the bond. "We are not partners, Sloane," I said, stepping back so she couldn't touch me. "And we are certainly not family." "But Logan," she cried, turning to him. "Logan, tell her. We are getting married. That makes us sisters. Grace, you can fix this. You can tell the board to stop the investigation. You own the building. You can tell them it was a mistake. Please, for your brother." Logan looked at her. He looked at the woman who had framed him. He looked at the woman who was now trying to use his sister's wealth to cover her crimes. "Do not talk to her," Logan said. His voice was quiet, but it was steady. "Do not ever speak to my sister again." "Logan," she shrieked, "you cannot be serious. I did this for us, for our future." "You did it for yourself," Logan said. He turned to me. "Grace, I am so sorry. I was so blind. I treated you like—" "You treated me like I was invisible," I said. "But that is okay. Logan, invisibility is how I built this." "I am going to sue," Mr. Mercer suddenly shouted, trying to regain some shred of dignity. "I will sue for entrapment. I will sue for hostile work environment. You cannot do this to people like us." I looked at Kevin. "Kevin," I said, "is Mr. Mercer a tenant or an authorized guest of a tenant?" "As of 10 minutes ago, his access privileges were revoked by the board pending the investigation," Kevin replied smoothly. "Then he is trespassing," I said. I turned back to Mr. Mercer. "You are trespassing on private property. If you do not remove yourself and your daughter from my lobby in 30 seconds, I will have Marcus detain you for the police. And given the evidence we already have of grand larceny, I do not think you want the police involved right now." Mr. Mercer opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked at the security guards who were now stepping closer, hands hovering near their belts. He looked at the crowd of people watching. He looked at the empire he had tried to bluff, standing immovable in front of him. He grabbed Sloane's arm. "Come on." "But Daddy—" "Shut up, Sloane," he hissed. He dragged her toward the revolving doors. They didn't look like high society anymore. They looked like what they were, grifters running from the law. We watched them go. My parents were still frozen, staring at me as if I were an alien who had just landed. "Grace," my mother said, tears welling up in her eyes again. "Why didn't you tell us? We would have been so proud." "Would you?" I asked. "Or would you have asked me for money? Would you have told Logan to ask me for a job? Would you have bragged to your friends about my success while still ignoring who I am as a person?" She didn't answer. She couldn't answer, because we both knew the truth. "I have a meeting with the audit team in 20 minutes, I said, checking my watch. "I have to go back up." Can we come up?" my father asked, his voice hopeful. "I would love to see your office." I looked at them. I looked at the parents who had put me at the kids' table until I was 25. I looked at the parents who had apologized for my existence 2 nights ago. No, I said. You cannot. My office is for business associates only. And right now, we do not have any business to discuss. I turned to Logan. You should call David, the lawyer. He is expecting you. Grace, Logan said. He looked at me with a profound sadness. Thank you for saving me, even when I didn't deserve it. You are my brother. Logan, I said. I would never let you go to prison for being stupid, but that is the last bailout. From now on, you are on your own. I turned my back on them. I nodded to Kevin. Shall we? I asked. Right this way. Ms. Johnson, Kevin said, gesturing toward the private executive elevator that required a biometric scan to access, the one my family had never even noticed. I walked toward it, my heels clicking rhythmically on the granite. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what they were seeing. They were seeing Grace Johnson, the disappointment, ascending to the sky, leaving them on the ground floor of a building they had walked past 1,000 times without ever knowing who held the keys. I sat in the leather chair of my private office on the 42nd floor. The view from here was different than the one from the rooftop terrace. Up here, the people below looked like ants, and the cars looked like toys pushing through a maze that I now controlled. The silence in the room was absolute, insulated by triple-paned glass and the heavy weight of authority. David sat across from me. He had a file open on his lap. The board of Meridian Fleet Group has capitulated, David said, his voice devoid of surprise. They are terrified you are going to void the master lease. They have agreed to all our terms. All of them? I asked, swiveling my chair slightly to look at the city. Every single one, David confirmed. They have issued a formal termination notice to Rick Mercer for cause. They are filing a civil suit against him to recover the embezzled funds. Sloan Mercer has been suspended indefinitely without pay, pending the final investigation. But realistically, she is done. They have also agreed to implement the new vendor compliance software we recommended. I nodded. It was a clean sweep. The Mercers had walked into my building acting like they owned the place, and within 48 hours, the building had chewed them up and spit them out. They had underestimated the one thing that matters more than social status in this city, and that is leverage. And the family? I asked. Rick Mercer is threatening a countersuit, claiming entrapment, David said with a dry chuckle. But he has no leg to stand on. He signed the emails. He took the money. His lawyer will tell him to settle before the end of the week. As for the wedding deposits, well, I imagine those are gone. Good, I said. Send the board a confirmation. Tell them Northbridge Holdings is satisfied with their remedial actions. The lease stands. For now. David closed the file. You saved that company a lot of money. Grace, you realize that, right? You cut out a tumor they didn't even know they had. I didn't do it for them, I said. I did it because I do not allow rats in my house. David left, and I was alone again. I looked at the clock. It was 2 p.m. My phone had been buzzing incessantly since I left the lobby, but I had not answered a single call. My mother had called 12 times. My father? 8. They were likely sitting in their living room, staring at the phone, trying to reconcile the daughter they knew with the woman who had just stared down a corporate dynasty. I finally picked up the phone when I saw Logan's name. I hesitated, then swiped to answer. Grace? His voice was quiet. He sounded exhausted. Hello, Logan, I said. I am downstairs, he said. Security won't let me up. They said I need an appointment. I felt a flicker of amusement. Kevin and his team were efficient. Put Marcus on the phone, I said. A moment later, Marcus's deep voice came through. Ms. Johnson. Send him up, Marcus, just him. Yes, ma'am. 5 minutes later, the elevator doors slid open. Logan stepped into my office. He stopped dead in his tracks. He looked at the floor-to-ceiling windows. He looked at the modern art on the walls. He looked at the mahogany desk that was wider than his car. He looked at me. I didn't stand up. I stayed seated. my hands resting on the cool surface of the desk. "This is," Logan started, but he couldn't finish the sentence. He walked over to the window and looked out. "You can see the whole city." "That is the point," I said. He turned back to me. He looked stripped down. The arrogance was gone. The charm was gone. All that was left was a man who had come very close to losing everything. "I ended it," he said. "The engagement?" "Everything," he said. "I went to Sloane's apartment. She was frantic. She wasn't sorry. Grace, she was just mad that she got caught. She kept talking about how you ruined her life. She wanted me to sue you. She wanted me to tell everyone you were lying." "And what did you say?" I asked. "I told her that if she ever said your name again, I would be the witness for the prosecution." Logan said, "I gave her the ring back. She threw it at me." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the velvet box. He placed it on the edge of my desk. It looked small and insignificant against the vastness of the office. "I am sorry," he said. "I know I said it in the lobby, but I need to say it again. I am sorry I didn't see you. I am sorry I let them treat you like that." "You didn't just let them—" "Logan," I said, my voice hard. "You helped them. You laughed when they made jokes about my clothes. You asked me for money because you thought I was too stupid to know what it was worth. You were ashamed of me." He flinched. "I know. I was trying to fit in. I wanted what they had so badly." "And now you know what they had," I said. "They had debt. They had fraud. They had nothing." "And you have everything," he whispered. "I have security," I corrected him. "I have freedom. That is what money is. Logan, it isn't champagne and parties. It is the ability to say no. It is the ability to walk away." He nodded slowly. "Mom and Dad they are freaking out. They want to see you. They think this means everything is going to change. They think you are going to pay off the house. They think you are going to buy Dad a boat." I laughed. It was a cold sound. "They are wrong," I said. "I figured," Logan said. "What are you going to do?" "I am going to do exactly what I have been doing for 10 years, I said. "I am going to work. I am going to build. And I am going to live my life." I stood up then. I walked around the desk and stood in front of my brother. "I am not your bank, Logan, and I am not your savior. I helped you today because you are my blood, and because watching the Mercers fall was necessary for my business. But that is it. If you want to rebuild your life, you are going to do it the hard way. You are going to get a job, you are going to work, and you are going to earn it." "I understand," he said. He looked at the ring box on the desk. "I do not want their world anymore. It is fake." "It always was," I said. He turned to leave. At the door, he stopped. "Grace?" "Yes?" Can I call you? Just to talk? Not about money, just as my sister?" I looked at him. I saw the regret. It was real. But trust is a building that takes years to construct and seconds to demolish. We were currently standing in the rubble. "Maybe one day," I said, "but not today." He nodded. He understood. He walked out, and the elevator doors closed. I sat back down. I pulled up the security feed on my monitor. I saw Logan walk out of the building. He looked small on the screen. He walked toward the subway station. He wasn't taking a town car. He was taking the train. It was a start. I checked my email. There was a message from my father. Subject: "Please call us. Grace, we are just so confused. We are so proud of you. Obviously. We just want to understand why you kept this a secret. We are a family. We share things. Please come home for dinner on Sunday. We can celebrate." I hit the delete button. There would be no celebration. There would be no sudden integration of my two worlds. I had drawn a line in the sand, and on one side was the family that loved the idea of success, and on the other was the woman who had actually achieved it. I wasn't going to cut them off completely. I would send a check for Christmas. I would ensure they didn't starve, but I would never let them into the boardroom. I would never let them sit at the table where the decisions were made. I looked out at the skyline again. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the city. The lights of the buildings were starting to flicker on, one by one. Somewhere out there, Rick Mercer was explaining to a lawyer why he had stolen $40,000. Somewhere out there, Sloane was crying over a lost lifestyle. And here, in the heart of the Hawthorne building, I was at peace. They had mocked my dress. They had mocked my job. They had mocked my life. They had thought I was nothing because I didn't glitter. But diamonds do not glitter until they are cut. And I had been sharpening my edges in the dark for a very long time. I picked up my pen. I had a contract to review for a new acquisition in the warehouse district. The work didn't stop just because the drama was over. The work was the only thing that was real. I signed my name at the bottom of the page. Grace Johnson, owner. The truth didn't need a party. It didn't need a microphone. It just needed to stand there, tall and unmovable, waiting for the moment when everyone else ran out of lies. I turned off the desk lamp. I picked up my bag. I walked to the elevator. Going down? But for me, there was nowhere to go but up. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to hear where you are tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and share your thoughts on the Mercer's downfall. If you enjoyed this revenge drama, please make sure to subscribe to the channel Lila Revenge Stories. Hit the like button and give us a hype to help this story reach even more people.